Well, welcome. I'm so excited today. My friend Greg Martinelli, who is a national speaker, he's a coach and a sales professional teaching people on sales. So, welcome, Greg.
Good morning, Kathy. It's great to be here. Looking forward to this.
Great. So, why don't you tell the audience a little bit about yourself and how you got into doing, the business that you're doing currently?
Sure. I spent 24 years in sales and sales management in a B2B and B2C environment, business to business, business to consumer. And then 3 years ago, left there and launched my big dream of launching a business of my own. Had the opportunity, things kind of just all lined up, and launched a training, coaching, and speaking service. And ran into you at several of the associations that we're part of, the International Coaching Federation and the National Speakers Association, and some of the other ones that you're at. And so that's kind of where this all ended up and started out. So I enjoy talking about sales and doing trainings and coachings and of course, always speaking.
Of course. So, why do you think most people kind of they just want to distance themselves from sales, or, they don't like selling, or even salespeople for that matter?
Yeah, no, I'm in that crowd, even though I'm in sales. But I think what it really comes down to is their image of sales comes from a couple places. One comes from the media, which the stereotypical salesperson for our generation was Herb Tarlick, really slick and slimy could be a definition. And that's how media portrays it. They see that in the media, and that's kind of that's the typical stereotype. So that's one bad image. And then I think the other is from their earliest childhood, when you think of people that sell, or when you think of your sales experience, it's, selling Scout cookies or, some subscription service that you did as a fundraiser, and it's not anything like what professional selling is all about. And so I think that's where people get that image, or maybe they run into the timeshare salesperson in Florida who leaps on them in the street corner and, tries to get them on a bus. And so I think they have that negative opinion of, wow, that's what sales is like, is making somebody do something that they don't want to do. And I've actually had salespeople tell me that when I do my interview and prior to training, they'll be like, well, I don't do that stuff. I'm like, well, what do you mean? They're like, well, I don't force people to do what they don't want to do. I'm like, is that what you think salespeople? You have to kind of walk them through that, explain what it is. And so I think that's probably where that negativity. The other thing I would say, and I happen to think about this, there's a couple of things but bad salespeople are very visible. Really good ones are almost not visible. And so if you think about, if you work in an office or you work somewhere and a bad vendor salesperson comes in, you buy from office supplies from somebody or medical supply, whatever you buy, whatever your company buys, and that salesman's really bad, everybody knows about that guy, and everybody avoids him. But if they're a good one, sometimes you know about them, but oftentimes it just kind of goes under the radar, and they provide a great product, they do their job, and everything goes great, and you buy a lot of stuff. But the negative ones get a lot of press, for sure. And they get dumped on the new person in the office.
Well, and that makes so much sense. When you think about that, I love that analogy, because when somebody is good, it doesn't come off as selling, like you said. They're
Right.
servicing you. You start have a rapport there. So it's more like someone that you like, or a friend, versus a salesperson.
Exactly. And it doesn't get regarded as, people don't think that that's how a salesperson can be and do well. So yeah, absolutely.
So what do you think some of the mistakes are that maybe entrepreneurs might make when selling?
I think one of the main ones, and I fell into this trap when I went from a big company to an entrepreneur, and I think probably many of your customers did that. They have a career of 10, 15, 20, whatever years of doing a job, and then they launch into their own business. And I think one of the main things, and I learned this at the association, is know who your customers are and what your product or your service really is doing for them. And so I talk about there's Simon Sinek, who is the guy that everybody knows. He's the YouTube sensation, multi-million-dollar, book writer and everything. And he says, start with why. And I think he's really wrong in that area when it comes to entrepreneurs. So I wrote him an email and sent him I think you're wrong. I think you need to start with who. I never heard back from him, and I don't think he cares about me. But in reality, narrowing your audience down, find out who really is your niche, your audience. And I think what happens when entrepreneurs go out and they start doing selling is everybody needs my services. Everybody can be a customer. And when they do that, they water down their message and their effectiveness at having an advantage. For me, I focus on a specific market that I was in for 24 years. And so then that audience that I go to, when I go to a prospect, they're like, well, you really know our business. And I think, or your business is really niched to us. And I think sales entrepreneurs, when they start out, it's like, I'm going to go to the biggest companies that buy my product or service, and that should be my market, or I'm going to go to any of them. And it's not really applicable to say, I'm going to sell the whole world. I mean, there's only one you, usually, if you're an entrepreneur and you're by yourself, or maybe one or two of you. So figuring out, that's probably the biggest mistake. And then getting down to, why should I buy from you? So there's 4 questions I always talk about when I do training. Why you as a person, salesperson? Why your company? Why now? And why should I change? And entrepreneur, if you worked for a big company, I was the feed guy. That's what I did. I sold feed. You're the feed guy. You have an identity that's already there. They know your purpose. They know but when you go out to be a consultant, or a speaker, it's like, what do you sell? Well, I'll speak on anything. I'll train on anything. I'll do all this stuff. And so they're out trying to sell anything to everybody because they're struggling and they're trying to figure that out. So those are probably the 2 biggest. The more time you spend on that, the more confidence they have when they go out in the market and try to sell to their niched customers. So.
And do you think that that it also is that, it kind of goes maybe back to the first question a little bit more. I think as entrepreneurs, we don't think about ourselves as a salesman, but every single person is a salesperson.
Sure.
No matter what you do, if you're working for a corporation, but you're selling yourself all the time. And when you look at that a little bit differently, and then also I think as like entrepreneurs and stuff, if we look at it in the aspect of that we're servicing somebody and we're helping somebody, we're giving them a service, we're helping them provide a solution to their pain.
Right.
Versus we're trying to sell them something.
Exactly. Once you get out of that mode of, I got to go in there and convince them of something, and you get into the mode of going in to help. And so I always look at it as, when you go in and you meet somebody for the first time, you ask the question as you're thinking to yourself in the selling process, can I help this person? Does my service really, truly improve their business? If the answer is yes, then you got a prospect. If it's no, you got a new friend, a network connection, somebody that you might ask, hey, is there anybody else? Your business is all set. You've got your person that does that, and they're bigger than me, and they're designed better for you than me. So great. Or they're your brother and you can't buy from anybody else. I mean, we run into that. Yeah. And so you're like, okay, I can't help you, but could I help somebody else that you know of that would be a fit for me? And getting away from that mode of, I got to go in and twist their arm and have the right words. It's not all about the words. It's about being able to connect. And to your point about everybody selling something, and it's a cliche sometimes that, hey, we're all selling. It really, I have to go through this though with people, because they'll always put salespeople in my training. But then in my field, it's science, so it's technical. So they'll put the PhDs in there and the veterinarians. And when I interview, the salespeople are like, yeah, this is going to be great. I can't wait to be at your class. When I get to the PhDs and the operations guys, they're like, yeah, I'm told I have to be there. And I'm like, okay, that doesn't sound very, excited. What's wrong? Well, I don't do sales. I was like, oh, really? I've got this down now. At first I reacted kind of like, yes, everybody's in sales. And now I'm like, oh, well, what do you do? Well, I help the customers understand the technical aspects, and I make sure that they get this, this, and this. And I'm like, well, no, that is kind of part of the process. You have to walk them backwards that you are selling something. And even if you're in accounting and in the office and you were hired, you had to sell somebody on your resume. And honestly, as you look around the industry, I mean, people are the number one expense. So trust me that your boss is thinking about whether you should be there or not, because you are, benefits and everything else that goes on with hiring an employee is very expensive. And you and I know that as entrepreneurs, we do a lot of our own work because it's expensive to hire a person. So you have to be selling the need for you to be there on a daily, weekly, monthly, quarterly, whatever basis. But I think you sold somebody your resume. And we get out of that mode, and you're selling ideas, and you're trying to convince the operations guys, trying to convince the sales team to get their orders in faster, and all those things that go on. So, and I think entrepreneurs run into that same thing. They love the product or the science behind it or the event itself, but they don't want to be in that sales. So they kind of just hand that off and think, I don't do that. But really, everything you do in a business is designed to keep a customer, to gain and keep customers. So everybody's in.
Well, right. I have to agree with you very much. And that kind of brings me to another question. And that is, we as small business owners, sometimes it gets to the point where we do need to hire a salesperson,
Sure.
So when do we, know when it's time to hire somebody? And then how do we set them up to succeed through that process?
That's a good question. And I think about it a lot. For me, I'm in sales and I sell sales training. So it's kind of weird for me to say, I don't want to do that. I want to hire somebody to do that. But entrepreneurs run into that moment when they think, I want to hire somebody. I think the time frame to hire somebody is after you as the entrepreneur have basically created somewhat, I'll just call it like a franchise. You've created an environment where the product and the services and the pricing work. And, you can take a geography or a set of customer segment and say, look, I know that this segment will sustain a salesperson's salary. And you can take about 1.25 to 1.5 times a person's actual salary. So if you pay them $50,000 in their pay, and that's what you hire them at, you're going to figure about 1.25 or 1.5. So about $65,000 to $75,000 is total cost with benefits and everything. And then you got to add on some travel. So you've got to be able to afford that gap. Once you hire that person, that is an outlay that you have to meet on a monthly basis. And I think that scares entrepreneurs at times. So in order to get over that fear, I think a person needs to have a model that works. If you're a startup and you don't know who your niche customers are and you don't know what the size of the market, so there's some homework you need to do there to say, this is what I'm going to do with this salesperson. I'm going to put them in this geography and this customer segment, and they're going to have to sell X amount of customers, and that's sustainable. It's reasonable. It's not something they've got to, they can't get 100% market share. If that's what it takes to support them, you probably can't afford a salesperson. So I think those are some aspects to think about. And then, from there, it's the model to set them up to succeed. You have to think about the model of the person. Do I need can I start them out brand new, 25, 24-year-old out of college or whatever, and throw them out there? Is there a tremendous amount of technical information and industry knowledge that they have to have? So then I need somebody in their, 30s or 40s, or, can I take some folks that are retired, because we're all working later in life now. So, can I take somebody that wants a part-time role and has industry connections and pay them some salary and some commission? I think that's the other setting them up for success. You want enough commission to make them hungry, but not enough to starve them. And that's always a balance. Is it 60-40, 80-20? And I would tell you that we debated that internally for 24 years. I was in sales and sales management. It was always a discussion on, they're not hungry enough. So let's crank it up to, 50% commission rates, or the business is so cyclical that they can't live on this commission structure. One year they're making 120,000, next year they're making 20. So that's not sustainable. So we have to go more base and less commission. So I think those are some things that you need to structure and think about as you set up and set them up to succeed. And then you have the confidence to know that that is sustainable and it's doable as a salesperson.
Well, and don't you think it kind of what you were talking about makes so much sense? And it made me think about a client that I had at one point, and she was always trying to find people to do sales for her, but really didn't have any structure behind it. Didn't really, just go out and sell and I'll pay you commission. And it didn't ever seem to work out.
Sure. And if you had somebody that really knew the industry, let's say an accountant that came to work for you and their accounting service, and they already know the game, they know the customer base, and you said, look, well, here's what I want you to do: go out and find $500,000 to $750,000 kind of size companies, and that's who our target market is, or $1 million revenue companies. And then they're kind of like, okay, I got the idea, I get the point. But if you take them and say you don't have it figured out, and you just send them out into the world, and I had, in St. Louis, there's a lot of entrepreneurial industries here, and I go in, I started out with them to promote my business, and realized, one, they don't have money, and second, they don't have a plan. A lot of groundwork that takes to figure that out, and it's doable. It's not difficult. It's just definitely have some direction, and the second part of that is, or another part of that is, don't abdicate the sales process. It's not send them out and then forget about them, unless you've got a complete commission program, like a product that you give, like the Mary Kay or something, where you send them the product and they sell it on their own. But most of us don't have that. We're involved in it. So I think the mistake is that I'm just going to hire a salesperson, then I don't ever have to think about customers. Please don't do that, because you never know what you're going to end up with. And you may end up with a bunch of sales, to industry segments you never wanted to sell. Or you may you may hire a B2B salesperson, and he or she goes out and sells B2C. I've had that happen in a company where our sole mission was selling to dealers. And I hired a salesperson, and they ran around and sold direct to a customer. And I'm like, this isn't how what are you doing? This isn't our model. You got to come back in, keep them, I had to put some big bumpers on the road to keep that person from going off course. But same thing can happen to an entrepreneur who just hires and says, go sell. You end up selling to distributors and direct and B2B and B2C and B2 whatever. And you end up with a mess. And it's very difficult to rein that in once it's all established. So.
Well, and another thing I thought about was too, is that it could really hurt your reputation if you don't have somebody trained and doing things the way you want things portrayed and your company portrayed and things like that. So kind of brings me to a question is, what are the traits and behaviors that a salesperson needs to be successful?
Sure, that's a good question. People ask a lot of times, what do you hire? How do you do that? One of the things I think to dispel the myths, in case somebody is thinking of the myths that are out there, is that you have to hire a big talking, gift of gab, backslapping, kind of person, and that's not true at all. You and I both use DISC in our trainings and our material, and people will ask me, which profile is better for selling? Now, I will tell them that typically there's certain profiles that are better at meeting and talking to people, but can be all very successful in how they run their relationships and their brand image of who they are and how they help people. It's not as important in their style, but they have to have some core characteristics. They have to be willing to do those things that are needed, which is cold calling, prospecting, as the company is set up. So I think as you're looking for people, and that's why it's important that you establish what you think that person will be doing ahead of time. Are they going to be developing their own leads and then going out on cold calls and finding their own and driving down the road and hunting down customers and all that kind of stuff? Or are they going to be sitting in an office with waiting for people to come in? So the selling environments are very different across the same industries, across the same company type of companies. And you have to interview and hire for that type of person. If you hire somebody like myself, who's been 27 years of driving on the road, I go out and I see customers, I find them, and you say, well, what we want to do is put you in a cubicle and have you wait for the phone to ring, and then you'll sell somebody. It's like a cage. I go to meetings now and it's like a cage. I got to get out. And I used to be in the meetings my early life, I was in meetings all day. So I think that's the characteristics you got to think about. When I hire this person, are they the second thing I think that's really critical for hiring is matching them to the culture of the company. You mentioned that a person can ruin your brand, your company reputation. Your brand as a company, everybody thinks their brand is what they put on their website. Your brand is what the customer, it's all owned by the customer in their head. And what they determine your brand is their contacts. So it's when they call your 800 number, when they talk to your sales coordinator on the phone, or they talk to you, or they see your salesperson or the delivery driver. I mean, our drivers and our sales coordinators talk to our customers every other day, possibly. Whereas we would talk to them once a week, once a month, to our customers as salespeople, because we have big territories. So our brand was the person that they see all the time. And so if your driver is rude and runs over their dog, that's your brand. It's not what, we believe in quality, or we're the greatest of this and we're the world's the greatest of this. That's great. You put on the website, but your driver just yelled at me, and that's your brand. So very important that people consider, is this person the right cultural fit for how I want my brand represented in everything from appearance to mannerisms to follow-up skills to how to get a hold of them, and all those aspects are really critical for customers for you to hand that off.
Well, to go back to when you had mentioned about the disc and, the kind of different personalities, I know you and I have had this discussion before, but about, somebody who is maybe, that introvert versus that extrovert. Does that come into play with, a salesperson?
I think it comes into play, and I always talk about this with DISC, is it's how you use and understand what you are to match it to the other person. So I am a certain style, and some of my DISC assessments had me almost off the chart in some categories. But when I sell from the center, I call it selling from the center of the crosshairs. If I run into an S, who would be my opposite of DC is my kind of category, and I run into an IS, I have to adjust my style to their style. They need time to process. They need time to think about things. They need, and I have to respect it. Now it's harder for me to go to that exact opposite because I don't identify with it as much. So I think when you get into those styles, the more the skill level is how flexible you are. If you are so much a D that you can't talk to anybody else but Ds and understand, and you think that everybody in the S quadrant is just wrong, well, then you got a problem with selling. Versus the person who says, I'm in the D quadrant because that's who I am. People in the S quadrant are fine. I just need to adjust my style and give them time to think about things, give them choices, make sure they understand that we're bringing the whole team along, that they may want a committee to make a decision, and that's okay because that's their style. That person will sell well. The one who, is a off the chart C and goes in with data and statistics to prove their point and can't understand the I who buys from a friend, that person's going to struggle. They're going to struggle because they're like, but don't you see, I saved you, 10 cents a pound here on this. This is a great savings. This is $1,000 a year. Yeah, but I got $1 million business, and this person is really a good friend, and they're there for me, and I like them, and I've been with them a long time, and they're just like, I can't understand why you would do it. So I think it's more how flexible you are in your style, and being able to connect. So as with you, I do in the trainings, I'll have them plot their customers. Yeah, that plot themselves, and then I say, okay, plot your top 5, 10 customers, whatever it is, and then plot your worst 5, the ones you really hate to talk with, and put them on the disc profile where you think they are. And if they polarize them, then I know that they're either just selling people that in this one quadrant, and you're missing 3/4 of the audience. And if they're all spread all over the place, then they got some flexibility in their abilities.
Well, yeah, I would think that, the flexibility and really just understanding that whole thing, and understanding that we all have our own styles, and that, somebody that really needs to have a lot of detail, other people just want to, hey, let's make a decision and move on, but just understanding other people is a huge thing. So when it comes to salespeople, do you think that that's born in them, or that most people can learn how to do that?
Very much learnable. The short answer is, I think it's very learnable. No different than self-awareness. And, there are certain people who are born with certain traits and characteristics that are helpful in the different quadrants, and the different, being able to connect with people. It just comes natural. Other people have to learn it through sales training or coaching, or they need, I talk about cross-training the empathyless, which is not a real word, cross-training the empathyless salesperson, because I had salespeople that worked with me and for me, and that were terrible to our office staff. They were the typical arrogant, yelling and screaming, and you had to bring them in and sit them down next to the accounting person and let them understand how hard it is to do what they're asking the accounting staff or the production staff to do. Why are they not being treated special? And then they realize, oh, wow. So I think and they learn. They're 30-year-old or 35 or whatever they are, and they're like, oh, I get it. They're not a bad person that doesn't care about me. Same with sales. I think you get out there and you learn from it. Now, again, some people are just naturally talented at being very sympathetic, empathetic, and understanding the business, or they grew up in that industry, and they have, their dad and mom and dad did that business, and so they were part of that business, so they have a really vast understanding, and then they're naturally good at selling because they can connect right away. But anybody that has the drive and motivation, I came out as a complete off the charts D, type A, demand. I mean, as an office manager, when I went into sales, everybody came to me like, what are you doing? Why are you going into this? This is not you. You don't even talk to customers. Why are you going into that? And I went into it, and 20 some years of career, and I think I did okay and did pretty good and do a lot of training and have fun. But it was that I liked to achieve. And so to be achieving as an office manager, which is accounting, customer service, credit, formulation, quality control, I couldn't be, like a salesperson trying to accommodate everything, because we would have never got our job done. We'd have been very inefficient. So I think, it's a very learnable, and much of what I went through and how to handle customers, I learned from a great mentor of mine. I worked for him for about 15 years, and he coached me down off the mountain many times about, okay, I get it that you're frustrated, the customer quit you. Here's some strategies, and I had a great coach, and that helped out a lot in gaining perspective on how I come across. So,
right. Well, I think it's the same way that when I think about having a mentor like that is really, really helpful. You have somebody you look up to. You can have somebody that can coach you and help you. And it's the same way with, being organized or being productive. People
sure.
say, well, I'm not born that way, but
yeah,
it's all about how important it is to you. And you can learn if you want to learn. It's making sure that it's not what you're doing all the time. And, if it's
right.
So.
Well, I think it's, your point about the organization. So my one of my blogs was the number one killer of salespeople is disorganization. I've seen it so many times. This person that you hired, that you said hired a salesperson and just sent them out there to do anything. When you run out there to do anything, you know, as an entrepreneur, when you try to do everything, it'll overwhelm you. And then so they don't do anything, or they don't do anything well. And so being organized is extremely important. And I run across it all the time. You know, I'm just not that person, or the desk is piled, which mine's actually kind of messy right now, but to me that's messy. But I always tell the audience, there's no organizational gene. I mean, some people are just naturally like to do that, but you can clean it up. If you prioritize it, you can do it. Same with spending time doing something. I was so busy, I didn't prospect. Well, if you thought it was important enough, you would have found the time to do it. Trust me, you'd find the time. We're all given the same. So organization and having someone as a coach is great. In my particular case, he not only was an accountability coach, which is kind of like just being there, just the fact that you have that person that's going to check on, did it work, is one aspect. And then the other ones where they can kind of almost consult by telling you, hey, here's something you might want to try. And so if you got the combination like you do in your organizational skills, was, hey, here's something you might try. Or, yeah, I get Greg, this is one of your coachings. Yeah, Greg, I get it that you're busy. Could you just do this for 15 minutes a day? I agree you can't do it for an hour. How about 15? Because you were going to go down to probably 5 minutes. And then it would sound ridiculous that I didn't have 5 minutes to spend on an important task, you know, which you had already established me as, you know, that it was important to do. And then you said, okay, you can't do an hour, but how about 15 minutes? And you're like, well, say no is just, you know, that's not realistic. So, but that coaching to somebody who's very organized and thinks he's very organized helps out a lot. It's a great experience to have. It accelerates the.
So, Greg, can you tell the audience a little bit how they can find you?
Sure. Easiest is my website. It's myname.net. So gregmartinelli.net, and Greg, Greg. Martinelli is MartinElli. So Martin, ELLI.net. Believe it or not, there's a .com out there. I think he's in New York. He's a artist of some kind, which that is definitely not me, not an artist. But anyway, so gregmartinelli.net, there's all kinds of free blogs, and we're doing podcasts, and there's a YouTube channel called Ag Sales Professionals. That's the name of my business, is Ag Sales Professionals. Ag is for agriculture. I was in that industry for many, many years, and that's pretty much where I focus. But I do consult with some that are not in the ag industry, but that's where they can get a hold of me. And there's all kinds of free articles about face-to-face selling. We call it belly-to-belly selling in the ag industry, because back many years ago, everybody had bellies, and so we all doing belly-to-belly. And but there's it's all written for the frontline salesperson and frontline sales manager. So I think some of your entrepreneurs that are out here, or solopreneurs, could see some value in, you know, what happens to my salespeople when they're out there. You know, what are they doing when I can't see them? You know, especially if you have on the road salespeople, that's a concern. So there's 100 and some blogs out there, and 30 or 40 podcasts. So they're all free, and hope people enjoy them.
Great. Well, thank you so much for joining us today, and hopefully you'll come back and share more later on.
Absolutely. Anytime, Kathy. I love it and enjoyed it. And please.